Mr. President, Ray McGovern is here to brief you.
Morning, Mr. President. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Ray. What a week. What a week. I thought we'd hit it out of the park with NATO there, and then next thing you know, Trump, he just owns television, doesn't he? Rising from the dead with his fists and fight on. Damn it. Whatever else you want to say. Sure, I don't want to see anything like that happen to him, but he makes everything turn his way. It's incredible. But anyway, what's the news here? I mean, let me just ask you, Ray. One thing bothered me. He just got off the hook here with that judge he appointed in Florida, a federal judge on the classified documents. Now, you guys in the CIA, I was going to make some joke. You're not involved with the assassination attempt, but I do want to know. Do you know anything I don't know? There's a lot of speculation, but about that judge down there, they're saying now, well, every president had classified documents, blah, blah, blah. You're in the classified document business. Is that true?
Well, most presidents have classified documents. Problem with Trump is the way he absconded with them and wouldn't account for them and apparently advertised some of their content to unauthorized people. But if you're asking about the assassination, I can truthfully swear that I know nothing more about what my former colleagues on the other side of those turnstiles that I talked about in the past may have known about it or perhaps even helped it. This is the real question, Mr. President, and it injects a note of uncertainty and unpredictability into the strategic equation. The Russians are trying to figure out who's in charge here. And frankly, there are a lot of people saying, oh, the president has, and I'll quote you here, let the FBI do their job with a thorough, swift investigation, end quote. Mr. President, with all due respect, that has been said many times over the last decade. And the FBI has not come up with any accurate results for these thorough and swift investigations. And they go right down the line. I could cite you chapter and verse. So a lot of people sort of skeptical about this. And others saying, my God, with this new iconic Trump, like Iwo Jima statue, for God's sake, with the American flag, what will the Democrats do now that this assassination attempt has made Trump so much a victim and so much more likely to succeed? And I'll finish up by saying that the Russians will be acutely aware that in the past, presidents have used hostilities abroad, whether it's in Africa with a chemical plant, well, they divert attention with a false flag attack, and the Russians are hypersensitive to that, particularly during these next 4 months. And so I wanted you to be aware of that because this has these kinds of.
But if you guys had done it, or your buddies on the other side of the turnstile, they wouldn't have missed, right? I mean, like I was just reading something that some paper somebody had it that Lumumba, that guy there in the Belgian Congo that got killed there, he was popular in Africa and we didn't like. He seemed neutral. I don't think he was pro-Russian, but he got knocked off. But they get there, guys, right? And this is I don't know how you just hit the ear, but I could get in a lot of trouble. But I know you, Ray, a long time. And I'm just thinking, this kid, if he did it, and if he's what he says, and you never know. 25 years from now, people keep speculating. But how do you just hit the ear? And if he. And now for Trump, that's the best of all worlds. I hate to say it. He pops up like he's, full of vigor and energy. Forget he's almost my age. And he can survive anything. And here I'm being given, and this was my best week. This was NATO, and they all 50 of them are, praising me and everything. And I don't know. Sometimes I wonder whether there aren't forces like what some people call the deep state that are messing around here. Now, you're part of you spent 27 years with the deep state there, Ray. Whether the turnstiles are or not, fool, lightweight. So okay, I'm not going to go down there. Give me your briefing. Do whatever you want.
Well, Mr. President, motive always is all important here. Uh, there are lots of details that raise suspicions, but cui bono? I mean, who has the most incentive to take Trump out of the scene here? I'll let perspicacious people answer that for themselves. That's one thing. The other thing is these.
Wait a minute. Bite your tongue there, because I'm getting a lot of heat. What was it, January 6th or something? I said something about he should be on the bullseye. I don't even remember saying it. But come on, even I don't know if you're making a joke here. You're not suggesting anything that we would have something to do with. Come on, that's very dangerous here.
Mr. President, in all due candor, you could be the last to know. Do you think that President Kennedy knew about the plans to do in Lumumba? Do you think President Kennedy was informed well beforehand of the plans to assassinate Nojin Jem in Saigon? The answers to those things are probably, you don't think that because they're not true. So when we look at this, we see that this was a incredibly bad situation there with respect to the Secret Service. They didn't secure the area. They should have been up on top of that roof. Now, there's one uniformed officer who has now come out and said, my God, he says, I was ready to shoot that guy before he got those shots, and permission was withheld by the Secret Service until after he took the shots. And then they said, all right, now do him in. My God, that guy's name is available. Where is he? Let's hope that he's in protective custody and not necessarily in the arms of the protective custodians of the FBI. And then there's another fellow who, a red-headed Trump supporter who was outside and watched this fellow with the rifle climb up the roof and try to shout to all the police and the Secret Service people around, look at that guy, stop him. And that nobody stopped him. So there are all kinds of anomalies here. And there was a major failure by the Secret Service. That can be said. It's not being said. I was a little bit surprised that it was mostly gratitude that was expressed to the Secret Service and the FBI. And I was reminded of former President Trump calling you out for never firing anyone. If you permit me a personal observation, I think everyone from the head of the Secret Service, maybe from Mayorkas, her boss, okay, everyone down to the head of the detail that was supposed to secure that site, they should be at least put on administrative leave because they were derelict in their duty and that's the charitable explanation.
You're sounding a little bit like Oliver Stone with that movie JFK and everything, and that guy Garrison. I mean, look, with Bobby Kennedy, there was that girl in the pink polka dot. Is this going to be there's some crazy ass conspiracy theories that's going to spin around? What is disturbing there? I feel that, and I want to back these guys. But that was the most obvious site from which to shoot somebody. How in the world? I worry because I'm going to be out there. Maybe somebody wants to shoot me, and you got a building that gives you a line of sight. They told me it's like the M2 rifle or something is an equivalent weapon, and in order to use that in the Army, you got to be able to take someone out from that distance. That's their standard test. Didn't require great marksmen. And this guy comes within the ear of killing my guy. I'm not going to feed those rumors because I would have nothing to do with that. It's the last thing I wanted. But yeah, you got to ask questions about the secret. What am I supposed to? Well, it's not your business what I'm supposed to do now as president. But maybe. Is this one of those inconvenient truths one doesn't want to go after, or what's going on here? I don't know, but you say you know nothing, so I got to talk to some other folks about this. Get on with your briefing there, Ray. I
Well,
mean, what's the world thinking? That's what you know about. What are people making of this? You make us look like a banana republic. I think, you know.
well, the Russians, for example, are playing it very straight. They say, there are some conspiracy theories, but who knows? And this happened, and this is awful, and we're not gonna call Trump and express our regrets or anything. So people waiting for other shoes to drop, and those of us who watch these kinds of things in the past, where the FBI has been put in charge of investigations, are pretty much convinced that this thorough and swift investigation is certainly not to come to any conclusions until after the election. And so that's something that will have to be dealt with by everyone, people in the world, outside in the world, as well as people in the United States. So who did this? Who had the motive? Who had the opportunity? And who had the timing? I mean, after all, today begins the Republican National Convention. I mean, in some respects, you could say, well, it's our last chance, for God's sake, before this guy becomes the candidate. Let's see what we can do. Now, I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist on Iraq. I said there were no weapons of mass destruction. On Russiagate, I said there was no evidence of Russian hacking of the DNC. On both of those conspiracy theories, I turned out to be right. So I'm just trying to warn you, Mr. President. I really do think you would be the last to know, but there are associates around you that are clearly really bent on making sure you don't lose this next election because of what will happen to them personally if Mr. Trump comes into office.
You know, Ray, sometimes I think you're just an old coot, and I'm keeping you briefing me because of our years. And I know you brief what? How many presidents did you brief? When did you
Three,
start?
actually, Nixon, Ford, and Reagan.
Yeah, I mean, so those guys, Reagan, you must have had to wake up there. Then but never mind. Let's not go there. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I've been around a lot, and I know. I mean, there's no knowing what people are doing, but you got to believe me. I believe in this country. I believe in democracy. I want just to be straight with you. All jokes aside, this bad time to be making jokes. And was I making a joke about that vice president and Kamala Harris and all that stuff and Trump vice president? I can't even follow this. It's such a tight game now. You say one little thing wrong. So this is nobody. Where's that White House intern? Get him off this whole thing. Scoot, get out. I don't want anybody to hear this, Ray. And this is not being taped, right now. I want to be clear about this. Yeah, go. I mean, tune out. Okay. I want to be clear about this. I love the country, and I don't think killing a candidate, if it's my opponent, is the right. I mean, ever the right thing to do. Let's just be clear about that. And even if I did lose half of my consciousness or brain, or Alzheimer's or whatever part, I don't know what they're claiming I have. I'm clear about that. That's not that's ugly. I said it publicly. I believe it privately. However, I've been around the block. I know. Now I don't call it the deep state, but I know we got a lot of people there who get away with a lot of stuff. And to this day, frankly, I don't know whether Lee Harvey Oswald did it. I'll never tell anybody except you. And I don't know, really what happened to Bobby. I don't know what happened to Martin Luther King, for God's sake. He was under 24/7 FBI surveillance. They were out to get him, or at least destroy his reputation. And he gets knocked off, And so, yeah, we got all these mysteries in our history. I stupidly the other day said, oh, this is a real surprise in America. Well, it's the norm in America. Come on, let's be talking to an old buddy like you. But what I'm really worried about now is that we pissed away this great victory we had with NATO, where we show unity, where we expose both China and Russia. We're expanding into the Pacific. NATO's, yes, I'll say it right to you, NATO is the new UN, but it's the UN heavy, not the UN light. And we're bringing world order. We're on the cusp of a great victory here. And so I'm worried that, first of all, I'm worried that I'm going to lose. And this guy, Trump, he doesn't even believe in NATO. Who knows what he'll do with them? Who knows who will invade or what he'll do? But anyway, take it. Tell me what are the people thinking? Where are we? And what's all this nuclear bomb stuff and threat? We're what I tell you, I'm more afraid for this world right now than I think I ever been. You know,
Mr. President, let me try to reduce it to its simplest terms. Um, the war in Iran is going very, very, very badly for Ukraine. It's just
you
the
said the war in Iran. You're making the mistakes that I make. Hello,
yes.
Ray. You said the war in Iran.
Did
You
I
meant
say
the
Iran?
war Ukraine. You meant, yeah, okay.
My
Yeah.
God.
You got the same problem I got. You're no kid yourself, you know. That's how
Well,
people make mistakes when they get older.
well,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll give you a pass. Just I wish the public gave me a pass for those kind of mistakes. But go ahead.
Well, the war in Ukraine is going down the tube. Okay, the Russians are advancing. It's just a matter of time before they decide how far to advance. Maybe Odessa, maybe Kiev, maybe Kharkov. And this is going to happen in the next couple of months, I'm sorry to tell you, Mr. President, before the election. And so, what do you have to respond? You don't have anything to respond with because that money and those weapons that were pledged back a month or two ago will not get there on time. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is whether the Russian proposal, the Russian terms are worth discussing, lest worst happen. And with Orban going around the world, last time we met, I suggested, however subtly, that since he had met with Zelensky and Putin and Xi Jinping and even Erdogan in Washington,
This is
that he
the
was,
Hungarian leader, the Hungarian guy?
yeah, the Hungarian
Yeah.
prime minister.
Yeah.
He was, of course, I'm sure he tried to get to talk to you, but he didn't. And so what did he do? He went down to Mar-a-Lago and talked to Trump. Okay, so these are opportunities that, in my view, are being missed. And I dare say that the Russians are looking on this, and particularly the decision to put intermediate nuclear weapons in Germany, the bilateral agreement announced in coincidence with the summit, that they're expecting the worst. And worse still, Mr. President, I have a little factoid that I want to present to you in a little bit of detail because you need to know it. And that is that the Russian early warning system of an intercontinental ballistic missile attack or attacks from submarines or from bombers is not as good as ours. They don't have geosynchronous satellites that can detect a missile firing anywhere in the world, Antarctica, North Pole, anywhere else. Okay, they don't have that. Worse still, the Ukrainian drones have attacked some of their early warning sites. What's that all about? So the Russians are very suspicious that hotheads in the United States, I don't know where they might be, State Department, the National Security Council, Defense Department, they don't know either, but they're worried. And that's why you had the defense minister in the Kremlin call General Lloyd Austin just 5 days ago and say, look, this NATO business, make sure you tell the president that we're going to have to react swiftly if they put intermediate nuclear forces, weapons, missiles in Germany. I hope he relayed that message to you. I was not privy to the transcript, but the readout made it very clear that in the wake of that decision in the NATO summit, the Russians wanted to be in direct contact with you through not Blinken, but through Secretary Austin, with whom they think they can deal in a more manageable way. I dare say they're probably right about that.
But how did this happen? Because, the whole idea was they're supposed to be able to see if a missile's coming, if it's the real thing and not a mistake or a blip or a decoy. I remember Ed Markey when he was in the House. Now he's a senator there from Massachusetts. He and a whole bunch of people used to argue we got to share this with the Soviets, that's the old Soviet Union, that they should know if a real thing is coming, so they don't fire and destroy all of us over nothing. Didn't we do that?
No, and that's the problem. Ted Postal, whom you know, argued strongly and was,
What's that? That guy used to be in the Navy, something, or
yeah, well, he
intelligence,
was chief intelligence advisor and weapons advisor to the chief of naval operations, the head of the Navy. He
and
was,
he did some stuff around the Senate or the Congress or something.
well,
I don't remember.
at MIT, who was a full
Yeah,
professor
yeah, yeah,
up
yeah,
there, and Stanford,
yeah,
Cal, and you name it.
yeah, yeah.
Guy's got credentials that won't quit. And he's very upset because he tried to get permission for the U.S. to tell the Russians, look, we know that your early warning system is inadequate. We see mutual benefit in making sure that you have the technology to make it adequate. And we're willing to share that with you. It's to a mutual advantage. Of course, he got the back of his hand. So it's Ted Postal who's really trying to raise the alarm here and say, look, if the Russians don't know, if they can't be confident that they are aware of an incoming missile, then Armageddon by mistake is likely to happen. And I think as we've talked about before, I was privy to a couple of really near misses. The most recent one that I observed was in 1983, when some colleagues of mine persuaded Director Casey to go down and call off White House participation in an exercise, a strategic forces exercise called Able Archer. The Russians thought it was the real thing, and we know that in spades. So that saved that one. How many courageous analysts in the CIA or in the Pentagon remain, and are they able to recognize this danger? I dare say it may not be as good as it was back in the day when my friend Mel Goodman and two of his colleagues went to Casey, bypassing Gates, and said, hey, look, tell the NSC, the National Security Council, to knock it off. And Casey did. Thank goodness. So what's going to
And
happen?
Casey was no Pinko. I
What's
mean,
that?
Casey was no Dove, or I mean, he was a tough character.
Well, it was
Yeah.
tough. Yeah, he believed that Bobby.
And where did Gates figure in? And Gates is the guy who he approved going getting Afghanistan all riled up, and then he said he didn't like it and was against it. And Gates was a complex
I'm not
guy.
understanding. Gates was what?
A complex guy. He came out of. He wrote a book, I remember, and I talked to him once or something.
Yeah.
He thought we were making a mistake, but when he was in power, he made mistakes. And then when he wrote the book, he said we made a mistake. And I think going into getting the Russians to go into Afghanistan, the Brzezinski business, I think he's
Yep.
the one that blew that open. Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, we're getting distracted here. My time is limited. You know, Trump's speaking. Who knows who he's going to pick? This whole thing is a bloody mess. But we don't want the wrong signals going out there. And you're telling me that we're not taking care of that?
well, just a word on Gates. Mel Goodman, whom I just mentioned, served with Gates under my leadership as branch chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch in the early 70s. Now, he learned very early that if you sniffed the winds blowing and you were a windsock, and when Casey came in, you saw a Russian or Soviet under every rock, you got promoted, and he was head of all analysis. And so at the end, when he was director of all analysis, it was then that Mel Goodman went up and said, look, Bobby, for God's sake, tell the White House to knock it off. And Gates said, as he says in his book called Duty, it's never been on the top of my to-do list to make the Russians comfortable or happy or at peace. Whoa. So he said no. And to their credit, they went around Gates and went right to Casey and said, look, please call the National Security Advisor. You got to knock this thing off. The Russians think it's the real thing. And Casey did. Casey, the diehard Russian expert who picked Gates.
Yeah.
Now, at the end of his tenure, after having advised not only the surge into Iraq to save Bush for being elected the second time, and the surges 3 of them into Afghanistan, okay, he addressed the military cadets at West Point on his way out, and he says, if I were advising the President of the United States, I would tell him what Douglas MacArthur said: don't ever get involved in a land war in Asia. The person went wild. Oh, that's great advice. So, a windsock for Gates, and you have lots of people around there that really see the writing on the wall and see it really as productive professionally to be anti.
Okay, Ray. I like chatting with you and everything. There's a lot going on this morning, but there's an irony here. I got that right? Irony. I got to watch my language and every word. So right. But I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I'm not as good a speaker as I used to be. I'm not, but I know about the danger of nuclear war. What I'm worried about is, do these other folks, younger people around, because we don't, they're not plugged in that way. I don't know. It's a big shift. Maybe you got to be older, to remember, you know. And it's interesting. I saw that Oppenheimer movie, and that kind of made it sound almost like a love story and an ego and this. But, people didn't come away from that more afraid of nuclear war. And you hardly hear anybody. Nobody says, oh, wow, why did we build a bomb? What can you do about it? Why didn't we control it? And I'm not going to give a pitch for myself, but can you imagine if Trump's president? That's why I'm hanging in here, Ray. I'm a good guy. Now, maybe sometimes I get things mixed up, and I introduce Zelensky as Putin. I mean, okay, you get tired. It's a lot of things happening. He knows who I was introducing. I knew Putin wasn't in the room. Come on. But one thing I'm clear about, I know something about nuclear weapons. You know that, right? And this guy Trump, if he's not in the employ, right? You say it's all made up, that Russiagate, but if he's not, they don't got something on him. You trust him with the bomb?
Well, Mr. President, you're quite right about the generational gap here, and I would include people like your national security advisor, Sullivan. Everything he exudes shows an aura of superiority, of exceptionalism, of indispensability. And I doubt, Mr. President, whether he is familiar with what really happens when you detonate just one little low-yield mini nuke just to stop the Russians before they take over the whole of Ukraine. I don't think he appreciates that, and I think that's the problem. And again, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what Putin and his advisors think. They look at your advisors and they realize they've never worn a uniform. They don't know anything about war. They think that these little nukes, these mini nukes, it could be little toys. And worst of all, Mr. President, as many people warned you a year ago, there's no choice that you have between defeat in Ukraine and using nuclear weapons to prevent that. And your advisors have a very deep personal stake in preventing losing in Ukraine, losing in the election, and then perhaps losing their freedom if this other fellow comes in because he has the book on them. I just would remind you about that, Mr. President.
Say, Ray, again, we're going to run out of time again, but every once in a while you say things to me that just seem ridiculous compared to what I'm hearing. And you keep talking. You did it a few weeks ago. You do it all the time, that the Russians, that they could advance. Right now, I saw that statement by Zelensky, but I see it from others. We got them stalled. They're not making advances. They're very tiny. And we're now pulling out our new stuff. It's finally getting there. I blame Trump for keeping it from them. You know that. That was going to be one of my big campaign themes. But we're getting it there. And I hear now, and we've given them permission to go further with their targeting and hit targets in Russia itself and what have you. And I hear that we got them stalled. Not that we can advanced now, we the Ukrainians, but they can't. And so, why do you keep giving me this stuff that seems really not to correspond to the facts? Are you just advocating? Are you just brainwashing? What are you doing here? I mean, I have to defend bringing you in, Ray, because you're supposed to be in semi-retirement or retirement, and maybe you're not getting the right briefings. But what I'm seeing right now, and there are reports in the papers or some of the remaining. I don't even know if we have any papers anymore, but the Wall Street Journal, a few others, that in fact the Ukrainians, they got a new draft going. They're getting more people in their army. So why don't you hear any of that stuff?
Mr. President, this isn't an old problem. I'm quite used to it. It's not very popular to be bringing bad news, and some presidents have shot the bringer of bad, not literally, but figuratively. But I have to tell you that the
Well, wait a minute, just so we don't start a whole nother thing. You mean figuratively, right?
right, right.
Right. You don't have some knowledge I don't have. Yeah, okay.
No, no.
This is
Well,
no time to kid around about stuff like that.
yeah.
People believe anything, that damn internet.
If they
God, life was easier without it. You just brought the New York Times bureau chief here, told him what to say or what the limits were, and everybody observed it. It's crazy, Ray. Just to, not to wander off. But they get me if I'm my gait. I don't even know what the hell gait is, but if I'm walking wrong or I'm tilting. Roosevelt, he was in a wheelchair with polio that he conquered or got over, but they had to carry him up in a segregated Navy. You had the black guy carrying the white president up to the ship, and then he gets up there, gives a speech, and nobody knows the guy's been near a wheelchair or been carried. He's carried like a baby up, up to the ship. Nobody knew that. They knew it. Some people in the media, they knew it, but the media was responsible. They never would have printed a word about that. Now, every time I make a little stupid error in grammar or get this from, something like that, boom, they're off to the races, and they're going to elect Trump by attacking my grammar. That's what they're doing.
Well, Mr. President, I'd like to just deduce some proof that you might want to seek outside counsel, as you're doing right now. The same people are telling you now that Ukraine can prevail or can at least stave off the Russian offensive are the ones that told you exactly a year ago that Putin had lost this war and had suffered a strategic defeat. The same ones, the director of national intelligence, Earful, who told you the Russians were running out of ammunition and they had no indigenous capability to produce what they've lost. That was a year and a half ago. So, records really matter. Kind of review the record here, see if these same people might be wrong again, because everyone I know, and I'm in touch with some very, very responsible military analysts, and I was one myself, realized that Ukraine is on the march. Now, the other thing I just make sure that you know here, that I want to make sure in this briefing, is that despite the NATO's attitude that they had put the Chinese in their place, that they realized that Chinese are to blame for a lot of what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. Well, China didn't get the message, Mr. President, because they're exercising with the Russian fleet now out on the Pacific, and Chinese troops, for the first time, I know it's the first time in 6 decades, I think it's the first time in 6 millennia, the Chinese troops in Europe and Belarus exercising with the Belarusians. So, just a reminder, a tangible reminder, Mr. President, that it's 2 against 1. It's China and Russia against us.
You keep saying that, Ray. We got 50 nations on our side. We got most of the world on our side. What are you talking about?
Well, the Pacific Islands, who are all always included in that 50 nations, not going to help us very much, Mr. President. Neither are our NATO allies in Europe, because the military's been shot. Why has it been shot? Why is it so ineffectual? Because there was no need to build them up. There was no Russian threat until we overturned the duly elected government of Yanukovych in Kiev in 2014. Then there was a Russian threat because the Russians saw NATO advancing toward Ukraine. They saw the new regime we installed there saying we need to become a member of NATO. That's when it all started. So the Russians waited, 14 down to 22, 8 years to negotiate this thing. Finally, it became impossible to negotiate. And that's how they looked at it. That's why they went into Ukraine. And Ukraine's not going to get into NATO, Mr. President. It's nice to make these promises, but the Russians have the capability and they have the intention to prevent it.
Okay, let's cut to the chase. We're wrapping this up now. I got a country to save. I got I'm not allowed to say a autocrat fascist opponent to defeat. But let me just ask you, Trump, he says he could end this in 24 hours. Now, what does that mean? Is he going to cave in to Putin and give him those 4 provinces and give him Crimea and so forth? What kind of negotiation and what could you do now? Before an election, he's got me between a rock and a hard place. He says he could end it in 24 hours, but if I do anything, I'm going to be attacked by Zelensky. I'm going to be attacked by all kinds of people for being a sellout, trying to make. I mean, I can't even get peace talks going over Gaza. I can't even get Netanyahu to go along in that. And some people starting to call me Genocide Joe. I don't want a genocide. I was all for a legitimate response by Israel to punish Hamas, get rid of Hamas, and go back to the two-stage solution as an illusion. Nobody ever thinks it's going to happen, but at least we could talk about it, humor the Palestinians that, you'll have a state of some kind. Well, that got all messed up. Now I can't even get a negotiation where I want one over there about Gaza and the West Bank. That's going to hell. But what am I supposed to do about Ukraine? You tell me the Russians could be in Kiev. Well, we are going to use our weapons that's what we got them for. We're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let that happen. And just because they got maybe more people in their army and they got old-fashioned weapons, we're going to use some of our modern weapons. I'm not going to talk now about whether we would ever use a tactical, but the reason we got these smaller nuclear weapons is to use them. I mean, to be able to use them if we have to. Okay, so that's the deal here. What are you saying? You're saying I can negotiate with them. What could I negotiate?
Well, Mr. President, I can't answer that unless we give it a try. In other words, the whole world is looking for example, Viktor Orban. Now, I'm no fan of Viktor Orban. Neither are you, of course. Trump is. Now, he's traveling around the world telling people, look, we have to talk. And it makes a certain amount of sense. So, Putin has put his terms down. There's some flexibility there. Your advisors are telling you to give him the back of your hand. That's some advisors. Others advisors will say, we'll see what he has to offer. I don't think, personally, and the people I talk to in the agency don't think that he wants to take over all of Ukraine, much less Poland, the Baltic states. That's ephemeral. Where will he stop? Well, as I've said to you before, he did stop. He did already stop. And that was in April of 2022, 6 weeks into the war, when he was satisfied that Ukraine said, okay, we won't join NATO, and he stopped. What happened?
But now he's got a lot of dead people. I mean, according to Zelensky, it's unbelievable how many people he's got there. I don't know the figure, but what's he going to say to the Russian people? We're having peace now, and we're going to get along. He's in the same problem that I'm in. How do you declare victory here?
Well,
that's always the problem. When you're losing, you're losing. Everybody loses in these wars. We all know that. There are no winners. Okay, so how do you make your mutual loss like a mutual victory? I don't see it around Ukraine.
Mr. President, as usual, I stopped at the Operations Center before I came in to see you this morning. This just in. Ukraine's top commander, Alexander Siersky, is ready to lay down arms and capitulate, a lawmaker of Zelensky's party has claimed. Okay? Siersky and Zaluzhny, who both oversaw all this stuff, are willing to fold, says the deputy chair of the National Security, Defense, and Intelligence Committee, a woman named Bezlugla. Okay? Now, the themes are becoming apart here. And the notion that
Wait. These guys are still running the Ukrainian
yeah,
military?
this is a person from the
Is this in some crazy tabloid or
no,
some
no.
weird internet? Where are you getting this from, Ray? Is this
Comes from the servant of the People's Party, which is Zelensky's party, and it says that these two generals, are secretly colluding to just stay in power, and don't care about these 500,000 people who have been sacrificed already. They say that he doesn't believe in victory, and earnestly thinks that we cannot get an edge over the Russians on our own land, says the member of parliament. So there are all these kind of feathers or things in the wind here, and the bottom reality is here that your advisors are not able to see this. Whoever told you not to meet with Orban, as I had very subtly suggested last time we met, I don't know what they have in mind, but the only option between now and November is the use of nuclear weapons to prevent a Russian complete victory in Ukraine and perhaps a victory for that other fellow in the election. So you don't want to have that choice. You were warned about that a year ago. You can't avoid World War III without using a nuclear weapon. You don't want to do that. You say you don't want to have World War III. So you need to get some outside advisors besides me and talk sense into these young fellas who have actually kind of not have a very good record in telling you just a year ago to say in Helsinki in a very ostentatious way, Putin has already lost in Ukraine. He suffered a strategic defeat. It's just 180 degrees from that now. And one must reckon with reality, particularly as an election comes near.
Ray, I'm going to ask you one last question because this will. I mean, come on, you can't even believe you were use a nuclear weapon and nuclear. I mean, what? That's one good thing about being in your 80s. Octogenarian. Let's hear it for the octogenarians. You're not there yet, are you? Oh yeah, you look pretty old. You're an octogenarian, right?
Mr. President, please don't misunderstand. What I'm saying is that you don't
No,
have.
no, I'm going to praise you now. Don't get defensive. So you're an octogenarian. I'm an octogenarian. One thing we do have is some knowledge of the terrible consequence of using nuclear weapons. You gotta believe me on that. I may say something. I may say, we're not going to be intimidated. That's the mutual assured destruction, the MAD philosophy. But anybody who's had this job, when they've been briefed, and I've been briefed, knows what these weapons do. What I don't understand, because I do hear a lot of loose talk, you got that Chernobyl there, and that was just a peaceful nuclear power plant. And some guys got drunk or whatever happened. They were shutting down the machines. They, had this big problem. They contained it pretty much with a dome, but it scared the hell out of everybody there. The lands around it were uninhabitable and all that stuff. So what I don't understand, and this is going to be my last question, we got to cut this off, but I don't understand the people there, Ukrainian, Russian, whatever, and sometimes they're all the same because those other provinces that Russians claim they speak Russian there. So what I don't understand is why aren't they afraid? I mean, the people in Europe, I mean, you couldn't have nuclear weapons going off. The Germans used to say, ohne uns, without us. They didn't want any part of it. Amazing, the Germans. They're the ones that killed. They committed the Holocaust. They authored it and everything. And now they don't care what's going on anywhere else. And they don't care about peace anymore. Bring it on. I don't know. It's crazy. Then they say, we pushed them into it. I didn't push them into it. But let me just ask you, I'm just being this is when the media gets me. My grammar might be slipping, damn grammar Nazis. But anyway, what I'm saying is, though, why aren't people there on the scene more afraid of this? And why aren't they pushing for negotiation? Because I push for negotiation now with Putin. Zelensky had me for lunch, and he'll back Trump.
Well, Mr. President, you raise the $64 question, as we used to say. Now it's a $64,000 question. Why are the Germans so servile? Why, instead of saying außer uns, they say mit uns? Actually, Gott mit uns. The old, God is with.
I thought it was ohne uns. It's
Oh
not
no, yeah, you're right. Ohne uns, without us.
Hey, so I corrected you. Huh?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, if I had sent it, then the media tears me apart, Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm saying here is this: that the Germans are ruled by a very tentative government right now. The Greens are so very powerful, but they're not going to be powerful after the
Hey,
election.
but they're no Greens anymore. They used to be for peace. They want war now. What
that's
the hell? What the hell happened to them?
that's all.
They used to oppose me. I think they still do in this country, right? The Greens are running Jill Stein against me and everything. What happened to the German group? Did you guys buy them off?
There,
Did you buy them off? Come on, Ray. You could tell the president. I won't tell anybody. You
well,
guys in the CIA, you got the Greens now?
well, the Greens in Germany are a very different hue than Jill Stein and the Greens here.
Oh, but they used to be more than Jill Stein, right? They had that woman, Petra Kelly, and
Uh,
that general, Gas
oh,
Joan or something. And
and
they were sitting in with Daniel Ellsberg everywhere. And no, oh no, oh no, oh no. Now what? They now want to go fight in Ukraine, right?
right, that's right. So the Greens are now. You have Bauer, Baerbock, the foreign secretary, foreign minister, and you have Halbeck, who's running the place. It's not clear that Scholz is very much in charge, because the Greens, who has become as powerful as the SPD, the Social Democrats, have this inordinate influence on what his decisions are. Now, by comparison, if I may, Mr. President, you and I are of a certain age. We are advisedly deathly afraid of people who might not realize what a nuclear weapon, what the use of even a mini nuke or a low yield nuclear weapon would mean for the world, for our children, for everybody, okay? But if you look at people half our age, Jacob Sullivan comes to mind, your national security advisor. Now, he might not have this same outlook on things. And I dare say that when people look like Putin looks at your national security setup, he sees Sullivan and Blinken advising you in such a way as to lead you to make very dubious decisions, as in Ukraine. So, looking at it from the Kremlin's point of view, they say that you might not realize that the only option that you might have would be nuclear weapons, and that these two young fellows don't realize it either. That puts them at a very high alert, and it endangers the whole planet, because it is true, Mr. President, you can't prevent defeat in Ukraine. The only option you have is nukes, and I hope that your stringent abiding by not wishing for a third world war, I hope that applies. But some people think that you might not be in the correct frame of mind when they suggest it. Then the question is whether Lloyd Austin would obey that, and everything I know, he would salute smartly, and we and our children and our grandchildren would be no more.
If I was bummed out when this became Ray, you got me more depressed. But you know what? I think I got to stay in this job, and I got to win this election, because you haven't answered the big question here, whether you call it the $64 or the 64 billion question. Oh God, you got to go bigger than that. I don't know. It's Trump, and that's my whole campaign. It's all Trump. It's all Trump, and you got no choice. And I can just promise you that I would not use the big one. Now you're telling me even the small one can't be used. And why the hell we've been building these things? Why are we modernizing the nuclear force if the small ones are not usable? To answer that question, Ray, that's the 64. What comes after the billion? Trillions, whatever. Why are we modernizing and been modernizing under every damn president? The nuclear force and getting better nuclear weapons. If you now tell me the small ones, I mean, are the small ones worse than Chernobyl? For they're hurting people?
Mr. President, I'm sure you know the answer to that. The profiteering on these kinds of manufacturing of these kinds of weapons, who hopefully we never have to use, they are immense. And the General Dynamics and Raytheon and Boeing and all these companies, six of them especially, are making it over the top. So that's gonna keep going here, and unless we kind of come to our senses and say we have to regulate this thing, we don't want a nuclear war. And let me add one more thing here, in terms of negotiations. I forgot to mention that not Trump, but Putin was asked at a Q&A just.
See, you made the same kind of mistake I made.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trump, Putin, Zelensky, Putin. Yeah, you made the same thing. You don't know him, well, they don't know you.
I'm just trying to make you feel a little better.
Yeah.
Only kidding. Okay, so here, Putin has asked this question. What about Trump? He says he could finish this war in a day. What do you think about his proposal? Here's Putin. We're aware of his proposal. We're really interested in how it is that he might propose to do this, but we welcome it and we support it. End quote. Whoa, okay, so in other words, whereas before Putin had said, I prefer you, Biden, because he's predictable. Well, I don't know if they've changed their calculus, but it does matter, and seems to be possible that when they look at what Trump says, well, let him flesh out how he's going to do this in one day. He's not going to do it in a day, but there is the prospect he can and he will do it. And that's what's going to be wafting around during these next 4 critical months.
All right, Ray. See you at the next briefing and next Monday. And I don't know. I don't know what I want you to bring in here, but my gut tells me we're going to turn this around in Ukraine, and we're going to turn it around in time for help me on this election. And anyway, people will understand this is the way we expand freedom. This is the way we make it a safer world. And, I'm not going to say your cautions are wrong. Is that the right word? Yeah. But I'm going to say I got to believe that people in our think tanks and, Brookings and all those places must know that Rand Corporation is still around there. They must know what they're doing because they were the favorite modernization of nuclear weapons. And so there's got to be these small ones you use to reverse the whole thing. Otherwise, why have we been building it? I'll leave you with that question. Maybe you come back and tell me next week. But we spend a hell of a lot of money, and we're very good at the science of these weapons. And these are supposed to be usable weapons, but they're powerful enough to scare the hell out of the Russians and make them back off. That's the reason I'm going to ask a few other people today, believe you me, if that's true. But, I've been told that over and over again. I was told that as a vice president. I was told that as a senator. And we've been spending a lot of money, and I don't want to use these weapons, but I won't take that off the table. We never have. We never pledged, to take them off the table. You know that, right? Right? Under any president, did we ever say no first use?
Well, Reagan and Gorbachev did say that no one can win a nuclear war. The problem is that many of your top generals and admirals have been saying something quite different. And of course, on the ground, you have the development of these very, very accurate, very, very, very subtle and very efficacious nuclear weapons. And so onlookers like Putin will say, well, why the hell are they developing them? Don't we have enough in the way of deterrence already? And would they possibly use one in Europe to prevent a defeat against Ukraine? Now, my judgment is that that's not likely, but as long as they're afraid that it's likely, as long as they're afraid that Sullivan and Blinken will pull the wool over your eyes and say that, we really need to do this, then that makes a very, very delicate situation. And add what I said before about their early warning system not being as good as ours. My God, I just hope we get through these next 4 months.
Yeah, or it'll be just the cockroaches and beetles left running around on this old planet. All right, Ray. And they think we're too old to have power. My God, sometimes they scare the hell out of me. I don't think anybody under 80 should be allowed to be president sometime, but then don't quote me on that because, people will think they also get angry when I use my low voice. What's wrong with having a low voice? I get reasonable. I don't shout like that guy Trump and everything. Oh, well, he's not articulate anymore. But, when you start thinking about blowing up the whole world and everything, you better lower your voice. That's what I'll say. I think my brain maybe is wiser than it's ever been, but you know what? An election season, you just got to think about winning, particularly when you got this opponent, and then after you'll fix everything if there still is an after. All right, Ray. See you next Monday.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.